Well, I didn't get the news until late on Tuesday, and actually it was a call from David Osborne that told me he was going to veto it. And then I looked down and saw that I had a voicemail at about 4:15, and it was him saying he was going to veto it. So after 12 days and on the very last day, it was somewhat of a surprise that there hadn't been any communication with us until the very, very last moment. And so, yeah, I was somewhat surprised by it and disappointed because I thought we had a fairly well thought out process and a plan going forward that the things that he wanted to address, we could have addressed in 2020 or in a narrowly tailored special session, not getting us back to the fiscal cliff, but avoiding the cliff and then coming back in and making the corrections he felt was appropriate. So I was a little bewildered by it.
So obviously he says he's going to call the special session before July 1, and that has a lot to do with the keeping of the
fiscal
rates,
year, correct.
Right? So, but what do you expect to see over the next couple weeks? Because last time we had a pension special session, there seemed to be a lot of confusion about a plan, who had a plan, if there wasn't, and things kind of fell apart. So what do you expect to see over the next couple weeks?
Well, I don't know. He says he's going to call a special session. We have no say over that by Constitution. So what he feels is an appropriate bill that can get the votes in both chambers is something he's going to need to propose. And one of the comments that he made, and I'm not being critical, I'm just trying to be factual, is to change the discount rate and make it higher, which is basically your interest rate, and the 30-year period as being the maximum area or length of time to pay out. Most of the entities we talked to couldn't afford to do that, and it would bankrupt them almost immediately. So that's why we went to a longer payout period and kept the discount rate as low as we could, because eventually there's going to be, no matter what we do, a fiscal hole here, and we just want to try to make it as small as possible while maintaining what all of us agree are critical services to the state.
So obviously, like you said, he probably needs to come up with a plan because there are certain parts of the bill that he doesn't like. That's why he vetoed it. But will you guys be meeting behind the scenes, you in the House, to kind of figure out your own plan? Because last time it seemed like he had his own, he produced the plan, and then that's where things kind of fell apart.
Well, based on the way a special session would work, it really doesn't help us to try to develop a plan because he determines the parameters by the call. And so whatever we do may be for naught because he will set the parameters. And until he sets the parameters, it is really all in his court at this point in time to come up with that, because he will set the agenda by Constitution. He will have the call date and everything else all in his hands. And there's not a lot we can do about that right now.
Now, speaking of him setting the parameters, the governor has said that he could see this happening in one day, a one-day special session. Do you think that's possible? We've not had that before. Do you think it's able to tackle that in that amount of time?
We've had many discussions among ourselves in the Senate, not necessarily in the House. I know, and we'll have those discussions, but I think the House is probably of the same mindset we are, that there's probably no way we could do this in one day. Just from a perspective of being open and transparent would dictate that it not be one day. Now, then you get into a question, is dicta in a Supreme Court opinion substance enough legally to try to run the risk of a one-day special session? I don't think so, not on this type of issue.
So when it comes to a plan, do you expect that it will continue to have the quasis and the universities involved in the plan? And do you think any broader reforms could be done during a special session?
I think it would be very difficult to go beyond the quasis, and the university fix, because at a point in time, because you have such diversity with 138 members in 2 different chambers, it gets down to the point of counting votes, simply counting votes to see how many you have and can you get something passed. To go beyond those parameters of those institutions that are defined that you've asked in the question would be extremely difficult to get the votes to pass in either chamber.
So when do you expect that he would call a special session? Obviously, he said before June 1, or July 1, but June is sort of when the universities set their budgets.
I don't know if they realize the dynamics of the universities and how they have to set their budgets to maintain their bond ratings and to be compliant with the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. It was my understanding there were several calls about that with the governor's office in the last few days, explaining the dire need for them to get something very quick, because they have to have budgets adopted well before their fiscal year of July 1, which we're only about 70 days away from, I think, if I count my calendar days fairly accurately.
Okay, so let's talk about the overall 2019 session outside of this issue. What were some of the biggest successes that you saw in the 2019 session, and how do you feel that this session came out for you?
I think it was a really good session. I give much credit to the House and the way we worked. You're going to be having a conversation with David Meade, the Speaker Pro Tem. We regularly met. We talked about issues. We were able to deal with the bank franchise tax. We were able to do the fixes on last year's tax reform, which really put us in a by far more competitive area. We were able to do Senate Bill 1, which is more security, or setting the framework for security for our children, our schools, and our teachers. You know, the things we did to create a better business environment and protect our overall atmosphere around schools, I think in and of itself, if we had only done those 3 or 4 things, would have been a very successful session.
Now, a couple things that were left on the table outside of broader pension reform. You guys did tackle some of the tax reform issues, but more comprehensive tax reform, and especially infrastructure funding was a big priority, I know, of the business community and a larger coalition, because we're starting to lose some federal funds, things like that. So will those things, do you expect to be tackled in 2020? I mean, we have to come up with another budget next year. Those are some big topics. There
is, and I think directionally, we are all on the same page. But when you say we're at point A and need to get to point B, then there's going to be the discussion on how you do that. And as we sit here in Somerset, Kentucky, there's several ways we could get to Nashville. We could actually go down here and jump in the lake and go all the way down on the Cumberland River to Nashville if we wanted to. We could go next door and get on a small plane and fly down there, or we could get in a car and go across the Cumberland Parkway down to 65. So there's multiple ways to get to places. It's just getting agreement on how you do that. But I think we're all in conformity with the direction and the place we eventually want to end up.